The Handkerchief by Great 78.
Chapter 136. Souls, Snapshots, Sword, and the Impending Summons. The fog of memories swirled and receded once more. Now Snape and Dumbledore strolled in the forest, discussing Dumbledore's meetings with Potter, presumably about the Horcruxes. Snape was expounding upon Potter's shortcomings in occlumency, and in shutting down his mind's connection with the Dark Lord. Draco was still so entangled in the previous discussion that he nearly missed an important piece of their conversation. Lord Voldemort's soul, maimed as it is, cannot bear close contact with a soul like Harry's, like a tongue on frozen steel, like flesh in flame. Souls! We were talking of minds, retorted Snape. In the case of Harry and Lord Voldemort, to speak of one is to speak of the other. Dumbledore stopped to admire the large flower-looking bulbs on a tree that looked like small onions, and made Draco think of the 3 broomsticks. After you have killed me, Severus, Snape interrupted, seething. You refuse to tell me everything, yet you expect that small service of me. You take a great deal for granted, Dumbledore. Perhaps I've changed my mind. Dumbledore turned away from the unusual tree. You gave me your word, Severus, and whilst we're talking about services you owe, I thought you agreed to keep a close eye on our young Slytherin friend. But Snape would not be mollified with the change of topic. He continued to breathe heavily, looking daggers at Dumbledore. Dumbledore sighed. Come to my office tonight, Severus, at 11, and you shall not complain that I have no confidence in you. This time, the same scene changed back to the headmaster's office. Fawkes preened and clacked his beak on his perch. Snape sat in the guest chair, whilst Dumbledore moved restlessly about the room, speaking almost as though to himself. Harry must not know, not until the last moment, not until it is necessary, otherwise how could he have the strength to do what must be done? But what must he do? Snape asked urgently, but Dumbledore would not be swayed. That is between Harry and me. Now, listen closely, Severus. There will come a time, after my death. Snape nearly rose to his feet in objection, but Dumbledore stilled him with a look. Do not argue, do not interrupt. There will come a time when Lord Voldemort will seem to fear for the life of his snake. At this, Snape dropped back into his chair, perplexed. For Nagini? Dumbledore nodded. Precisely. If there comes a time when Lord Voldemort stops sending that snake forth to do his bidding, but keeps it safe beside him, under magical protection, then I think it will be safe to tell Harry. Tell him what? Now it was Dumbledore's turn to hesitate, to look unsettled. He spoke slowly and deliberately. Tell him that on the night Lord Voldemort tried to kill him, when Lily cast her own life between them as a shield, the killing curse rebounded upon Lord Voldemort, and a fragment of Voldemort's soul was blasted apart from the whole, and latched itself onto the only living soul left in that collapsing building. Part of Lord Voldemort lives inside Harry, and it is that which gives him the power of speech with snakes, and a connection with Lord Voldemort's mind that he has never understood. And whilst that fragment of soul, unmissed by Voldemort, remains attached to and protected by Harry, Lord Voldemort cannot die. There was total silence. Even Fawkes had grown quiet. Draco felt as though his heart was trying to leap out of his chest through his mouth. He felt a cold chill twist from the tops of his shoulders, down his back and legs, and into his feet. Potter was a Horcrux. An unexpected, final Horcrux, it seemed, besides the snake. Potter had brought the memory here to watch, and he was gone. Gone to die. Draco breathed shallowly through his mouth, panting and sickened at the thought. So, the boy must die? Snape asked in a monotone. And Voldemort himself must do it, Severus. That is essential. Dumbledore's eyes pierced Snape. The room stayed quiet another moment. Then Snape said plaintively, I thought, all these years, that we were protecting him, for her, for Lily. Dumbledore grimaced as though the words he spoke pained him. We have protected him because it has been essential to teach him, to raise him, to let him try his strength. Meanwhile, the connection between them grows ever stronger, a parasitic growth. Sometimes I have thought he suspects it himself. The elderly wizard closed his eyes as he spoke, as though he feared the sight that awaited him. If I know him, he will have arranged matters so that when he does set out to meet his match, it will truly mean the end of Voldemort. Dumbledore opened his eyes, letting them rest on Snape. Snape, for his part, looked utterly repulsed. You have kept him alive, so that he can die at the right moment. Don't be shocked, Severus. How many men and women have you watched die? Dumbledore asked, a bit harshly. Lately, only those whom I could not save. Snape ground out between clenched teeth. He stood. You have used me. Meaning? I have spied for you, and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you. Everything was supposed to be to keep Lily Potter's son safe. Now you tell me, you have been raising him like a pig for slaughter. But this is touching, Severus, the headmaster said, with a touch of awe. Or was it rancour in his voice? Have you grown to care for the boy, after all? A vein protruded from Snape's forehead, and he withdrew his wand swiftly from his robes. For him? Snape cried. Expecto Patronum! A silver doe emerged from Snape's wand tip and frolicked around the room, passing in a sweeping circle, before disappearing out of the window. Dumbledore and Draco followed the progress of the doe, staring at the window where she had disappeared for a moment. Then the older man turned back to Snape. Draco saw that he was teary-eyed. After all this time? Dumbledore asked in wonder. Snape fixed him with a steady stare. Always. Now, there was a swirl of scenes involving Munungus Fletcher and Dumbledore's portrait. But Draco's mind was stuck on the previous memory. He was confused. Why, of all animals, was Snape's Patronus a doe? It seemed so unlike his character. They had talked about the theory of the Patronus charm in Flitwick's class before they had dismissed for Easter. Patronuses could change over time, he knew. Had Snape's begun as something else and changed later? If so, why? Tonks had told him once in their defensive training that hers had changed to a wolf when she was in love with Remus, but he was rebuffing her because of his affliction. Had Snape's changed for a similar reason? Unrequited love? He thought back to what he had overheard Hermione telling Ron about Snape's final moments. Had Snape shown her something of this? Draco felt even more sympathetic towards the wizard. It was one thing to love someone deeply, but to love someone deeply that didn't love you back, or that you would not allow to love you back because of your ridiculous beliefs. Draco could not imagine. He was certain that Snape regretted his actions later in life, and had likely tried to do what he could to atone for them. But in the end he was sure that the man's regrets far outweighed anything else within him. Now was the flight from Potter's muggle relative's house. In the distance, Draco could see his own form racing away, followed by Travers and then Selwyn. Snape was flying with Yaxley, who was aiming for Lupin's back. Snape rushed to point his wand at Yaxley. He yelled, "Sectum Sempra!" But the spell missed Yaxley's arm, slicing off the ear of the Weasley twin instead. The scene changed again, and Snape was in a bedroom whose walls were covered in Gryffindor hangings and unmoving muggle posters of girls with various cars and motorcycles. Draco wasn't sure who all this belonged to, or what house they were in, but then he saw Snape kneeling on the floor, staring at some papers. Draco hurried over and saw that the paper was a letter, signed with love by Lily Potter, and from the first page in Snape's left hand, Draco could see it was addressed to Sirius Black. This, then, could be Sirius's suite in the Black House. As he watched, Snape folded the page in his right hand and placed the parchment in his robes, dropping the first page onto the floor. Then he plucked a wizarding photo from the mess of papers on the floor and examined it. A young baby with a shock of dark hair scooted past a pair of man's legs, across the bottom of the frame, on a tiny toy broom. It was smaller even than the one Draco had crashed into the rhododendron bushes in the manor gardens when he was 7. Lily Evans Potter threw back her head in sparkling laughter at the sight of her young son zooming around on the little broom. Even Draco had to smile a bit at the glee on baby Potter's face. Then Snape tore the photo down the center, dropping the image of father and son back to the floor, where it floated under the chest of drawers. The other half he clutched to his chest. The space was clouded with mist once more. The headmaster's office appeared again, and now Draco heard a voice that seemed slightly familiar from his own visits there. One of the headmaster's portraits was speaking to Snape, who stood to get closer to the painting. The old painted headmaster seemed to be panting, with either effort or excitement. "They are camping in the Forest of Dean. The mudblood! Do not use that word!" Snape snapped, his eyes flashing in anger. The portrait huffed excitedly. "The Granger girl did. She mentioned the place as she opened her bag, and I heard her."
Draco's heart stuttered to hear Hermione's name and Snape's small defense of it.
Good, very good. It was Dumbledore, from inside his own frame a few paintings away. "Now, Severus, the sword. Do not forget that it must be taken under conditions of need and valor, and he must not know that you give it. If Voldemort should read Harry's mind and see you acting for him, I know," said Snape perfunctorily. As Draco watched, Snape stepped to Dumbledore's portrait and pulled. At first, Draco wondered if he was removing the painting for some reason, but then the portrait swung like a door. Behind it, a hidden compartment, much like the ones in Lucius's study, was revealed. Snape withdrew the sword of Gryffindor, shut the painting carefully, then raised his eyes to his former headmaster once more. They exchanged a steady look, a brief nod, and Snape turned swiftly on his heel. He grasped the sword tightly in one hand as he axioed a thick cloak and settled it magically over his shoulders. "And you still aren't going to tell me why it's so important to give Potter the sword?" asked Snape in a resigned voice. "No, I don't think so," said the painting of Dumbledore. "He will know what to do with it." Snape turned to go, but Dumbledore had one last piece of advice. "And, Severus, be very careful. They may not take kindly to your appearance after George Weasley's mishap." Snape turned back to Dumbledore's portrait, looking at Dumbledore but also directly at Draco. He gave the tiniest of smirks. "Don't worry, Dumbledore. I have a plan."
And then Snape was gone. The mist returned, but now it seemed to swirl and not reform. Draco sat back from the pensieve in shock. He recalled Hermione's words about Potter and Weasley finding the sword of Gryffindor. Harry saw what he thought was a Patronus, possibly a doe, and he followed it. The sword was in a pond of some sort. This, then, had been Snape's method of getting them the sword. Draco remembered her saying that the locket nearly drowned Potter, that Weasley had had to jump in after him, had rescued him, and gotten the sword. A true act of bravery. And now Potter was going into the forest to confront, surrender to Voldemort. Another true act of bravery, sacrificing himself to destroy the final Horcrux. Potter must have worked out a plan for the snake to be killed. But the sword, the only thing besides basilisk fangs capable of destroying a Horcrux, was in Draco's rucksack. With a cold rush of fear that travelled from his spine to his legs, Draco opened the rucksack and plunged his hands inside. Object after object presented itself, but none of them was a ruby-encrusted sword hilt. A leaden feeling settled in his stomach. The sword had disappeared. It had been there. Merlin, could that have only been a handful of hours before? He had checked to make sure it was there on the bank of the lake. It had brushed his hand in the pub with Ginny. But he had not checked for it since arriving at Hogwarts. It couldn't have fallen out. Did it disappear? Vanish back to its rightful place? Draco raced to the empty portrait that he knew typically held an image of Dumbledore. It was a blank stretch of canvas, featuring an ornate golden chair and a pillar, but no wizard in half-moon glasses. Undeterred, Draco reached up and grasped each side of the painting, pulling on both sides, tugging to find the way that it opened. It was futile. The painting did not budge, did not reveal the cavity within. Draco almost wondered if he had imagined it. A voice suddenly rang out, familiar and terrible. Unlike before, where the voice seemed to permeate the air, existing in and around every person and object in the space, this voice seemed to be coming from outside the castle, magnified for everyone to hear. "Harry Potter is dead." At these sickening words, Draco rushed to the window which, like many of the other windows in the castle, had been broken. The sight that greeted his eyes knocked the very wind from his lungs. At the very edge of the forbidden forest, Voldemort stood at the center of a large crowd of masked and hooded Death Eaters. Interspersed amongst them were plainclothes ministry workers, a handful of spouses and sympathizers, and Draco's mother.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.